Well, good morning. It is awesome to be back with you for our online Bible study. We've had a little bit of a hiatus since Chris was up here bringing us through 50 Days with Jesus. And so I hope that you've all online enjoyed your summer this summer and have continued your own journey, whether it's with Jesus or connecting with God in other parts of the Bible. But we are back. And what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks, 4 or 5-ish weeks, is we're going to be doing a dive into the 23rd Psalm and in the spirit of a worship workshop. Much of the folks that come here in person for this is our worship team. And so as I was preparing what our next kind of Bible study would be, online Bible study, I thought, let's do a worship workshop and make it as applicable as possible. And so if you are a worship leader or you are on a worship team or you are looking to understand and appreciate that musical worship experience, that part of the service more, these next few weeks are really going to be for you. And so I hope this is not just a good resource for us at Dayton Christian Church, but also a great resource for wherever you are serving God in ministry. And as I stated, we're going to be in the 23rd Psalm, and specifically, we're just looking at the first verse. And I'll read it, and I'm using the English Standard Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I want to share an experience from my own life in ministry. I'm not going to use any names, but this is something that actually happened. And so I had the opportunity to go and pastor a church, and they had a worship team that was really depleted. I think most of us have spent time somewhere maybe where we have really been in a situation where maybe we didn't have as many musicians, or maybe the musical skill level wasn't at like Mozart levels. And maybe you have been in a situation where you've been in a big church and there's always musicians. You're even auditioning people to be on the worship team, and this won't connect to you. But this was a situation where the worship team was so depleted, they actually had no musicians. When I visited for the first time, they used pre-recorded music. And I see some faces here that are grimacing. It was about as the faces you just made either online or right here in person was the experience musically. It was rough. It was really rough. And so having led worship before in churches and been on worship teams and going there to preach and wanting to make sure that we had the very best experience possible, I went to the worship leader and I said, hey, I will join your worship team. I don't particularly like to do that. I don't think we're at our strongest when the pastor is up here the whole time. This is a worship service, not Pastor Josh's variety hour. But, you know, they needed musicians so bad, and I just kind of was like, oh, boy, they may not want me, but they need me. And so I started playing guitar for them, and things went pretty well. Well, at least I thought they went pretty well. Because about a month in, then the demands started. The demands started from this worship leader, and we had a really hard time seeing eye to eye because my vision was, hey, we need to just get a starting point. And the starting point is me coming in and helping and providing some music so we can get off this canned stuff, and then building the relationships maybe with some local musicians. And we're at the bottom, and we kind of just have to build our way up slowly. We have to be realistic. And her vision, God bless her, was that she had Hillsong and all of those, that incredible production in her mind, and she just thought, that's how we need to sound. And it kind of came to a head where we were doing this Christmas thing, and she expected me to be able to play just like, she kept sending me this same track. I need you to play like this. And I finally had to just tell her, I would love to be able to play like that, but I can't. I can't. And that, we both walked away from that, this worship leader and I both walked away from that experience really, really frustrated for different reasons. And this is the fallout from that. For the longest time, I put my guitar away. When I moved to Dayton, I actually put it in the closet, and I haven't played it till 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago was the first time I picked it up. So if you're here, you know kind of how long I've been here and how long that is. But for those of you who are online, we're talking about like well over a year and a half. Just no desire to play. It really burnt me out. Even though I've been in ministry, even though I'm now at a church where we have an incredible worship team, lots of talent, lots of skill, lots of heart, my own desire to pick up that instrument and play just plummeted. And then this worship leader, who a wonderful woman, so passionate, she ended up just leaving ministry completely. And so why do I share this? Why do I kick off this workshop with such a sad, depressing story? Because these are the stories we hear a lot in worship and on worship teams. We hear about the problems a lot more than we celebrate the successes. And I thought, where can we go to really get a better handle on the worship experience and build ourselves up so that we have less of the stories that I just shared with you. I think the 23rd Psalm is really helpful. I think it's a really, really helpful place. It's one of the most beloved scriptures, chapters in the whole of the Bible. Many people have it as their favorite psalm, and that's saying something because the Psalms is just God's worship book for Israel in the Old Testament. And so for this to kind of be the cream of the crop and rise, it's worth investigating. But just the very beginning, that scripture I read to you, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Identifying in our worship, in our musical worship, on our worship teams, in our worship services, identifying our wants versus our needs is critical. It's critical. Whether you are a worship leader, whether you are on the team, whether you are a pastor, and so you are participating in creating that worship service, understanding our wants versus our needs is critical. And I want to kind of differentiate between those. Because having wants is not necessarily a bad thing, but having wants overtake us is. I want to say that again. Having wants is not necessarily a bad thing, but having those wants overtake us is. There's a lot of things in life I want, right? But if I'm living my life only ever in the pursuit of satisfying my wants, that can quickly spiral out of control. And worship, and I'm specifically talking about the musical worship experience for us. Worship teams, worship culture is a place in church where we see that over and over and over again, where we start to live and aim and go after our wants, and it quickly spirals out of control. And we have stories like the one I shared with you, where people get burnt out and they put maybe love that they have for something away, and then or they just leave ministry, or they leave church ministry completely. And it's a lousy experience, and we want to aim for a better one. So what I want to do is just kind of differentiate between some needs and wants. And let's start with this. We need to worship God. Worshiping God is a need for the Christian, for the believer in God, for the disciple. We need to worship Him. We are commanded to worship Him. It is not an option. It is not a choice. And so, the saddest part of the story that I shared you, and the saddest part of a lot of tragedies that happen, is people get turned off and they leave worship. They stop worshiping, whether that means they stop coming on Sunday mornings or connecting in some way. And that is awful because we need to worship. Worship is a need. Notice how I said we need to worship. I never said we need to worship with hymns. I never said we need to worship with contemporary music. I never said we need to worship with the latest music that Passion or Ring Collective or Elevation or whoever is giving us. I just said we need to worship. So this is the differentiation between need and want. I said we need to worship. That's true. But often what we hear and what we interpret that is, I want to worship this way. I hear you, Pastor Josh. That's why I want to worship with this song or with this collection of instruments or this group of people. I want to worship that way. And if I don't get what I want, then I'm just not going to, or I'm going to be a thorn in the side, or I'm going to be a problem. So it's really important right out of the gate that we understand the need versus the want. We need to worship. We need to gather. We need to enjoy fellowship. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to do it the way you particularly think and feel and experience. And that can be a hard thing, but that is a necessary thing. We need to follow the direction of God. Notice what David says. David starts with, "The Lord is my shepherd," which means that David is the sheep. It doesn't say God is my co-shepherd and we're partners in this. God is my shepherd. I am the sheep. I just spent the last week at our county fair supporting a lot of our FFA. If you're unfamiliar with that, that means Future Farmers of America. So, and 4-H kids in our church. And many of them were showing lambs. Lambs are really stubborn. And I remember particularly one instance in this, during these competitions, where this young girl, she probably was 14, 15 years old, certainly looked like a newbie to the program. She could not get her lamb under control. That lamb was running all over the ring, and she just kept kind of throwing her hands up, and you could tell she was frustrated. You could just tell she was frustrated. Do any worship leaders feel like that? Because your congregations aren't singing the songs with you, or you've got that, group that are always sitting there, arms folded, because you're not singing that one song that they've been singing in church for the last 100 years. And you just feel like the sheep are all out of control, and you just want to throw your hands up. And I just want to remind you, you're not the shepherd. You are not the shepherd. It is not your job to get them under control. That is God's job. So if you are in a difficult situation, whether it's in your church or right here at Dayton Christian Church or wherever, and you're having a hard time leading, we need to understand who the actual leader is, and that is God. And that means we have to humble ourselves and submit and say, God, you are the shepherd. I need to follow you. Use me as the example. When we're leading people in worship, we are the example. We are the first ones in the congregation to go to God and say, God, accept my offering of worship. Accept this musical offering of worship. There is an adage that has been kind of ingrained in me. If you're around our church, you've heard me say this many, many times before. I'll never ask somebody to do something I won't do. And so if we are expecting people to get on board, whether it's with a musical style or something different we're trying in our worship services, we have to be willing to model that. Well, Josh, I'm trying to do that. I'm singing the song. I'm out there. I'm showing them, but they're just not getting it. I don't think there's anything that young girl could have done in the ring to get that lamb under control. The problem, and this isn't my diagnosis, or this isn't me diagnosing the situation, because I have about as much experience in one of those shows rings as that. That girl has more experience than I do. If I had been in the ring with that lamb, the lamb would have been out of control as well. They would have seen a grown man tripping all over himself instead of a 14-year-old girl, and I would have done it definitely not as gracefully. I asked somebody who has a lot more experience and said, what's the issue? And what the person said is, she just hasn't spent enough time with it. This is where the difference is. She didn't spend enough time with it, and you can tell. Worship leaders, are we spending enough time with our congregations? I'm not talking about when you're in front and leading them in worship and playing the music. I mean, are you involved in small groups? Are you purposely putting yourself in a small group with some of those cantankerous individuals so they can hear you and understand your heart? Are you trying to find the areas of the church where they're interested in and then saying, I'm going to go and participate in that, or I'm going to spend some time after service or before service really trying to connect with them? Are we spending enough time with God's flock? Or are we just getting in front of everybody and expecting, because I'm up on a platform and a stage, they're just going to follow along? We need to worship God. That is not the same as I want to worship God the way or I need to worship the God the way I want. We need to follow God because he is our shepherd. That is differentiated from I want to be the shepherd. And I genuinely believe a lot of us who lead up here, whether it is worship leaders, musicians, or pastors who preach, or pastors who get up here and give directions, or whatever it is, I think a lot of times we see ourselves as we are the shepherds. God is the shepherd. God is the shepherd. Really amazing. I kind of revisit what I observed in that FFA world at the county fair. Really amazing to contrast that example of the young woman who just hopelessly could not get a hold of that sheep with like a master showman. And what I mean by that is somebody who actually won an award for going into that ring and showing a sheep, showing a lamb, and having incredible control. Absolutely having incredible control over an animal. The difference isn't like, oh, well, one animal is just completely obstinate and there's no way to control it and it's just hopeless. And then one is just great, the greatest lamb ever. That's not the difference. The difference is the person right there spending the time, understanding the animal, knowing where to place his or her hands, keeping their eyes fixed on the judge. This is pretty incredible to watch. And I love, if you're online and you're saying, I live in Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington, I've never been, maybe even been to a county fair. I thought county fairs only existed to serve me fried food. There's like an inlet. Just go to YouTube and search for, lamb showing or FFA or something. Just watch it, because it's really interesting to watch people who know how to do it well. They're taking what is basically a very unintelligent animal. I don't think it's an accident that often we are referred to as sheep in the Bible from God's point of view, but it is really amazing to watch them have complete control of this animal and have the animal trust. Have the animal trust that person that is with it. It's amazing. It was a lot of fun to watch that and support that and see a lot of our kids show that kind of incredible control. It's time. We need to worship. We need to follow God as our shepherd. Not, I want to be the shepherd. We need to spend time with our flock. We need to know what their hopes and dreams are, their fears and concerns. We need to know why they love the music they do, and we need to share why we love the music we do and the story behind that. Why it's important. Why it's important that we continue to add new songs to our worship book, and why we need to continue to go back and revisit some of those beloved classics, because there are stories there too. We need to worship. We need to follow the shepherd who is God, and we need to spend time with our flock. and differentiating. I said we need to worship. So the need to worship trumps the I want to worship God this way. The need to follow the shepherd, the true shepherd, God, trumps the I want to be the shepherd. I want to be the leader. I want it to all reflect on me. We need to spend time with the flock trumps I want to just mix in with the people that get it. That get it. A lot of drama on worship teams really boils down to the cliquishness of, well, these people get it. These people understand. It's a movement we're trying to create here. I just want to mix in with the people that get it. That leads to a lot of hurt feelings. That leads to a lot of rejection. And understand there's going to be people in that dynamic on the worship team that are really good musicians or really good at their craft. They're really great. We have to be better than just great musicians. We have to have the humility and the spirit that goes along with that. And part of the humility, building the humility, if you are an amazing musician, you find yourself on a worship team right now, and man, they are just not getting it. They're not rising to the level you are. Well, maybe God has placed you there so that you can work with people that you may see as beneath you, but really the reality is God's teaching you patience. God's put you in a situation where you can help people grow, and that takes time. That takes patience. That takes you being humble and sharing more than just amazing music talent, but sharing your love to grow in that instrument, grow in that, the song selection. We need to spend time with the whole flock and not just, these are the people that get into my church. Love that. We need to make use of what we have. We need to make use of what we have. Now, for those of you who know me well, you might be surprised at the story that is shared. Because I'm the guy that's always pushing us to grow and be better and try new things and keep the foot on the accelerator is something that a lot of people around here have heard me say since I've been here. So it might kind of surprise you that in that experience, I was like, hey, we kind of need to go slow. We've got this, and then we just need to grow little bit by little. Understand something. You can only work with what you have. If you are in a situation where, you've had the grandma of the church, and I don't mean that to put anyone down. I actually mean that as a huge compliment. There are women who have been playing pianos and organs in our church. They're amazing. If we just stop with the genre comparison and we just focus on the talent, they've taught piano, they teach organ, they're incredible. But if you have played that kind of music for like the last 40, 50 years, you cannot in 1 week, in just one decision, go to sounding like what's on your Christian radio or that incredible music group that you heard at the last conference or camp you're at. You just can't do it. Like, that's impossible. That can't be the standard. And so we have to make use. We need to make use with what we have. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not want because my focus is on the shepherd, and he gives me what I need. And I trust him in that. What has God given you? What is God giving you to use in your church, in our church? And can we make the most of what we have right now, not just be lost in the constant want and desire? A lot of things I want. A lot of things I want in ministry. And those things, again, not necessarily bad. But if I'm so focused on that, that's the differentiation. I need to make use of what the shepherd has given me versus wanting all the things I don't have. Am I missing the journey? Am I missing the experience of what God is doing in my life? Especially with regards to depending and trusting him by letting my wants and desires overshadow that. That is something that happens in the dynamics of worship teams, worship leaders, pastors all the time. And here's the thing. Are we bringing in our prayer life as part of that need? You know, we need to worship. There may be some things or areas where we are not as strong. So are we taking time to pray? God, will you bring this part of our worship that is lacking? We really miss it, or we really would like to add that or have that. We don't have it now. God, will you bring the personnel or the people? And then do we trust him to answer the prayer? Rather than just being angry or bitter or not happy. Those attitudes, that anger, that bitterness, that unhappiness, whether you know it or not, you project that when you lead people in worship. If you're unhappy about something on Sunday morning, and it has to do with an area where we're lacking, then what do you think the flock's going to pick up on? So we need to worship. We need to follow the shepherd. We need to spend time with the flock, and we need to learn to depend on what he has given us. It's not about, I want to worship this way. I want to be the shepherd. I want to spend time with my own people, and I want this, and I just can't be happy without it. Powerful words from Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What would it mean for you as a worship leader, in your worship team, in your church, as a pastor? What would it mean to leave behind a life spent desiring and want and leading strong in need, in what we need? Ultimately, that will always point us to God, who is the one who can provide for our needs. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to, as we continue on in Psalm 23, have a blessed worship service this week. And if you are on your worship team, if you are a worship leader, if you are a pastor, lead your church strong, first and foremost, by following the lead of our great shepherd, Jesus Christ. God bless.